It's the quarterfinals of the 2026 World Baseball Classic, a baseball tournament that takes place every 3 to 4 years between the best national teams across the globe. Team Puerto Rico is facing off Team Italy at Daikin Park in Houston. But based on the sights and sounds at the stadium on this warm March afternoon, you might think you're in San Juan.
It's crazy. I mean, this is full of Puerto Ricans. I couldn't believe it when I got here. So when they did the anthem and everyone was singing, I was like, oh my God, everyone's here.
That's Luis Bermudez. He was born in Puerto Rico, but has lived in the Houston area for many years. He's come to the game with his twin daughters, Emily and Vanessa. Here's Emily.
It's like the closest experience other than being in Puerto Rico, you know, being surrounded by so many fans.
And many of these fans have barely sat down since the game began. They're playing instruments and chanting, "Si se puede!" Here's another fan, Nico Marina.
Right now, if you look at the stadium, I don't know, probably 80% of the stadium is wearing either a flag or a Puerto Rico jersey.
If 80% of the fans are wearing a jersey, then 79% of those jerseys are for the same man. His last name is on Pittsburgh Pirates jerseys, Puerto Rico national team jerseys, and Santurce Cangrejeros jerseys. You already know who that is.
Roberto Clemente. I mean, he's a perfect example of what a good baseball player is, and Puerto Rican.
Roberto Clemente, perhaps the greatest Puerto Rican baseball player of all time. But when fans remember him, it's not usually because of how he played.
I mean, the way he died also for his tragic death and helping others.
But what many don't know about Roberto Clemente is that perhaps he would have never become the ball player and the icon he became were it not for the Negro Leagues and the Black American baseball players who popularized the sport in Latin America and the Caribbean. Throughout Clemente's childhood, the likes of Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, and Monty Irvin came to play in Puerto Rico, forever shaping baseball history in the archipelago. And if the Negro Leagues helped create Roberto Clemente, then Clemente's legacy, decades later, helps create the kind of passion and energy for baseball seen in Daikin Park today. An energy that Nico's daughter, Alexandra, describes perfectly.
It feels like home in a stadium right now with like all the people and like everyone's just super excited to be here and just super excited to like root on our team, you know?
Home in a stadium, even when home is more than 2,000 miles away. Because for many Puerto Ricans, there's no more powerful reminder of home than baseball. From the Latino newsletter and Shake It Easy Media, you're listening to American Colony, a series about the ways colonialism shapes the everyday lives of Puerto Ricans. In this episode, how Black baseball players elevated and changed the game in Puerto Rico, and how, in return, they were treated with a sense of freedom and dignity they had never experienced in the United States. I'm your host and diehard baseball fan, Julio Ricardo Varela. This is episode 3, Never Felt Freer. In order to understand the history of baseball in Puerto Rico, we have to go back to January 1898.
It first arrived basically in late 1890s. There was a gentleman named Amos Iglesias Van Pelt, whose dad was from Puerto Rico, but his mom was from New York. So basically, this fellow, Amos Iglesias, returned to Puerto Rico at age 16, and he worked side by side with a Cuban expatriate named Braulio Sanchez, who gathered Cuban players.
That's Thomas Van Heining, historian and author of 3 books on Puerto Rican baseball history. Although born in the U.S., he grew up watching Winter League baseball in Puerto Rico, where his father was an economist for a local government development agency.
On the other hand, Amos Van Pelt put together a local Borinquen team, and the first official game in Puerto Rico took place on January 30th, 1898. It lasted 9 innings, and this preceded the famous 1898 Spanish-American War.
In fact, that official game had actually begun a few weeks earlier, but was suspended in the third inning because of rain. And that means that baseball reached Puerto Rico before it became a U.S. colony. Territory.
From about 1916 to 1937-38, a series of barnstorming games took place over a 2-decade period.
Barnstorming. Back in the day, plenty of professional and semi-pro teams spent a lot of time on the road, traveling to new cities and countries to showcase their talent and often played against locals. Soon, teams began traveling to the Caribbean and Latin America to sharpen their skills in the winter months. And black teams were coming to Puerto Rico from the beginning. Now, black baseball teams have been around as long as the game itself. The first black team to come to Puerto Rico was the Cuban Stars in 1916. But in 1920, a man named Rube Foster wanted to formalize a structure. He called a meeting in Kansas City of players, owners, and managers where they officially created the Negro Leagues. That's when black baseball really took off across the U.S. and beyond.
And they love it. We love them. And that's when the relationship with the Negro Leagues teams began in Puerto Rico.
That's Jorge Colón Delgado, official historian of the Puerto Rico Baseball Professional League, author of 7 books and director of 3 short films. He says Negro Leaguers were immediately successful in Puerto Rico for one simple reason.
Since the beginning, baseball in Puerto Rico was integrated. We never had that problem with segregation.
That's not to say there wasn't racism in Puerto Rico, but there was no formalized structure of racial segregation. So baseball was always integrated. And these Negro Leaguers changed Puerto Rican baseball by popularizing a new upbeat style of play, according to Colón Delgado.
They brought out a new type of baseball, a happy baseball, an aggressive baseball, and we learned a lot.
And these players were met with a hospitality they never experienced in the U.S.
When we went to those countries, we were treated like heroes.
That's Bob Kendrick, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. From the 1930s through the 50s, Negro Leaguers didn't just play in Puerto Rico. They traveled to Mexico, Venezuela, Panama, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba.
So you're going to stay in the finest hotels, eat in the finest restaurants that those countries had to offer, and then you came back home and you were treated like a second-class citizen.
Kendrick isn't exaggerating. When they were on the road in the U.S., Negro League teams were often taunted with slurs and denied entry into restaurants. But the biggest struggle was finding somewhere to stay. Bill Greason, a former Negro Leagues pitcher for the Birmingham Black Barons, who also spent time in Puerto Rico, describes the struggle.
Boy, we stayed in some terrible hotels. And I remember a couple of places we spent the night outside because of the critters on the inside, on the sheets and things.
Another former Black Baron, Al Holt, remembers.
When you hit town, they had boarding houses where you could go stay at. But say you didn't have no money, you couldn't go in those folks' house. Your team ain't covered. So you had to stay on the bus. It was hard. You slept on the bus, you ate on the bus, and you bathed on the bus.
So Puerto Rico provided a stark contrast. Here's Thomas Van Heining.
They were treated like royalty. They had a chance to eat at the best restaurants. They could stay at the best hotels. The team owners accommodated all their needs. Like during the days when they actually had to travel by ship to Puerto Rico before it became easy to travel by air, they worked out the passage, accommodations.
Oftentimes, the players learned to speak Spanish.
In the words of the immortal Josh Gibson, you learn to speak Spanish very quickly when you're hungry.
And they participated in the social life.
These Negro Leaguers had a chance to mingle with the fans. So some of them played dominoes in the town plazas.
And they experienced a newfound freedom and acceptance.
As a result, a lot of Negro League players would call those Spanish-speaking countries home for one simple reason. In those countries, they weren't black baseball players. They were just baseball players. That's all they ever wanted to be.
It wasn't just black Americans coming to Puerto Rico. White players were there too. Black and white Americans were playing integrated baseball in Puerto Rico years before Jackie Robinson crossed baseball's color line in 1947. But according to Bob Kendrick, these white players didn't always adapt to their new country in the same way.
It was just a job for them. And the Negro League players seemed to ingratiate themselves into those communities because they felt like they were part of those communities. But you also find when they went to play in those countries, there was no separation. They all played together.
Throughout the 20th century, roughly 220 Negro Leaguers played and managed in Puerto Rico. Sometimes they'd play a few barnstorming games, but mainly players joined clubs in the winter months to keep their skills sharp during the off-season. One of the earliest players to come to the archipelago was legendary pitcher Satchel Paige, who played in the 1939-1940 season.
Satchel Paige, he came to Puerto Rico and he won 19 games, 208 strikeouts.
With those 19 wins, Paige actually set a record for his team, the Brujos de Guayama. By this time, he was a pretty well-known celebrity. In fact, my late abuelo, Papito Juan, remembers when Paige was in Caguas and told me he was the greatest pitcher he ever saw, and that he even saw Paige driving around in a car that said something like, "Greatest pitcher in the world." I've never seen a photo of that actual car, but I always loved it when my abuelo would tell me that story. Paige had so much confidence and flair, except, as legend would have it, for the time he walked off the mound in the middle of a game because he thought he saw a ghost. Anyways, as players like Paige popularized baseball, the archipelago was creating a league of its own.
The Puerto Rico Professional Baseball League began in 1938 with 6 teams, and it was a huge success. The next year, there was an expansion.
1 year later, a man named Pedrin Zorrilla started a new team, the Santurce Cangrejeros, or the Crabbers.
His wife, Diana, told me that they spent several weeks of their honeymoon. Pedrin was scouting Negro Leaguers in the States. And she remembered him, talking to the players and the managers.
Zorrilla spent his honeymoon traveling the east coast of the U.S., recruiting black baseball players.
And she noticed that there was a certain rapport. And for some reason, he really bonded with Josh Gibson.
Josh Gibson, often regarded as one of the greatest baseball players of all time. He was a catcher, a power hitter, and the second player to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame based solely on his Negro Leagues record. He came to Puerto Rico a couple of times, and he wasn't just a player, he also got to be a manager.
So the only 2 times that he had an opportunity to be a manager in baseball was in Puerto Rico. And Joshua Gibson, in his biography, says that the best moments he had in his baseball life was the moments he lived in Puerto Rico.
During a stint in Puerto Rico, the 1941-42 season, Gibson won the batting title with a staggering .480 average and a legendary home run estimated at 600 feet. At least that's the story. But 4 years later, in late 1946, Gibson's health was failing. 3 weeks before he died of a stroke from his brain tumor, he sent a letter to his old friend, Pedrin Zorrilla.
A few weeks before he died was to Pedrin Zorrilla, and he said, to my hermano, to my brother Pedrin, to a black player say that to a white person, or a black person say that to a white person in 1940s. That was big. He was his brother.
Sometimes black baseball players found more celebrity in Puerto Rico than anywhere else. Like the power-hitting outfielder from Shreveport, Louisiana, named Willard Brown.
He was MVP. He batted .400 in 2 different positions. He has a .350 lifetime batting average. He's the best batter. Offensively, he's the best one. And he was so popular.
In 1947, just months after Robinson debuted for the Dodgers, Willard Brown stepped up to the plate with the St. Louis Browns. He was the fourth black player ever in the major leagues. In fact, his nickname was Home Run Brown. He was the first black ball player ever to hit a home run in the American League. But Brown struggled with racism. At the time, St. Louis was the southernmost team in the majors, and Brown, along with a black teammate Hank Thompson, were said to have faced more discrimination and taunting than Jackie Robinson, who played in the more liberal city of Brooklyn and was garnering much more attention. After a disappointing season in St. Louis, Willard Brown was let go from the team. So that winter, he came to Puerto Rico. Here's Bob Kendrick again.
Willard Brown won the Triple Crown twice. His Puerto Rican Winter League home run record of 27 in 60 games still stands to this day. And in Puerto Rico, his nickname was Ese Hombre, that man. And when Willard Brown came up to the plate, the fans would start chanting, Ese Hombre, because they knew he was going to do something special, and more times than not, he did.
That's right. Just months after struggling to hit the ball in St. Louis, Brown played a legendary season in Puerto Rico. He continued to spend his winters playing on and off in Puerto Rico, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and Venezuela for the next 10 years. He spent most of the regular season in the Negro Leagues, where he mainly played for the Kansas City Monarchs and continued barnstorming games through 1958. But he was never called back to the majors. He reflected on his time abroad decades later.
I tell you, most of the places in there, we got more respect than we did here. That's what I can say. I put it that way, because we got more respect in them foreign countries than we did in our own country.
Jorge Colón Delgado says there's one moment that captures Brown's true celebrity in Puerto Rico. It happened in 1951 when Luis Muñoz Marín was governor.
Luis Muñoz Marín, he gathered all those players that were selected to the All-Star game to the Fortaleza, the governor's mansion. And I have a picture of a white woman giving a kiss, kissing Willard Brown in the Fortaleza. So there you can see that scene here in Puerto Rico, white woman kissing a black man in the governor's mansion.
Another Negro Leagues player who became a pillar of the local community, Monty Irvin.
The late, great Monty Irvin, who was a bona fide superstar in the Negro Leagues, but as big a superstar in Puerto Rico.
Bob Kendrick actually knew Monty Irvin. He was a powerhouse hitter and a strong-armed outfielder. According to Kendrick, Irvin described his time playing in both Puerto Rico and Mexico with the same word: free.
He says, I never felt more freer in my life. He said, for the first time, I felt like I could be my natural self.
Originally, many thought Monty Irvin would be the first black player signed to the major leagues. Back in 1945, Branch Rickey, the manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who would go on to sign Jackie Robinson, asked one of his scouts to look into Irvin. Irvin described the situation in an interview decades later.
He got in touch with me and told me that he's getting in touch with some other fellows to try out for the major leagues. Well, I had just gotten out of the Army, and I didn't, really feel up to the opportunity.
So Irvin had a request.
So I told him, I said, give me about a year. And so I went and played ball down in Puerto Rico to try to sharpen my skills.
But baseball scouts weren't the only ones paying close attention to Irvin. During the 1945-46 season, there was also an 11-year-old boy from Carolina, watching from a tree just outside the right field fence.
When Dad was a kid, he was a big fan of Monty Irvin.
That's Roberto Clemente Jr., son of the legendary ball player Roberto Clemente.
Dad used to go work with my grandfather, earn a little money, and then he would ask if he could actually take their trolley down to Sisto Escobar Stadium where the Negro Leaguers played. And he will go and climb up the tree up and behind the fence in right field. And that's where Monty Irvin will be playing. So he will be up on the tree and he would watch him practice and then the games.
Soon, Irvin noticed a young fan watching him from the right field tree.
But one day, Dad, he was in front of the ballpark and Monty was coming in. And Monty handed him his bag for him to walk into the ballpark with him. So he walked him into the ballpark, him carrying Monty's bag. Monty opened the bag once they were inside the ballpark and handed him a glove. And for him, that was like his real glove.
Monty Irvin gifted Roberto Clemente his first real glove. As Clemente grew up, he began to have more things in common with the baseball player he once idolized. Here's Thomas Van Heining.
Monty Irvin was the champion javelin thrower in high school in New Jersey. A lot of people don't know that. Well, guess what? Roberto Clemente's best high school sport was throwing the javelin because Roberto's high school didn't really have a baseball team, but they had a track and field team. Roberto was so good throwing the javelin that the University of Puerto Rico campus at Mayagüez offered him a scholarship.
But he didn't take that scholarship. He was chasing baseball. By 1954, Clemente became a rising star in Puerto Rico, playing on a stacked Santurce Cangrejeros team in a lineup that also included Willie Mays. Yes, Willie flipping Mays. Mays even remembered Clemente as the best athlete he ever played with in a 1987 interview.
But he could throw, he could run, he could hit. He was pretty close to anybody that played baseball-wise.
You probably know what happened next. Clemente debuted for the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1955 and became a superstar. He was known for his powerful arm, his 3,000 hits, and a lifetime average of .317. But then, tragedy struck. On New Year's Eve of 1972, while delivering humanitarian aid to Nicaragua after an earthquake, he died in a plane crash. Clemente was only 38 and still an active player. I was 3 years old at the time, living in Puerto Rico. All I can remember is seeing people like my abuelo and my own dad crying when they found out.
This is why baseball is the most romanticized sport of them all. Because when Roberto Clemente dies tragically in that plane accident taking supplies to Nicaragua after the horrific earthquake, baseball waives the 5-year rule for him to get into the Hall of Fame. Who does he go in the Hall of Fame with? You guessed it, Monty Irvin. Yeah, the two of them go in the Hall of Fame together, mentor and mentee. And what it tells me is every hero has a hero. And for young Roberto Clemente, who became a hero for so many, Monty Irvin was his hero.
There's a photo of this moment. Clemente's widow Vera is in tears, and next to her is Monty Irvin. Roberto Clemente Jr., then 7 years old, remembers.
After that accident, they were both inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame the same day, on the same class. So I know he was, looking down and being happy and so honored to have been inducted with his idol into the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Roberto Clemente passed away more than 50 years ago, yet his name is still synonymous with baseball in Puerto Rico. Colón Delgado summarizes it this way.
Clemente is the only athlete that has every year more admirers without seeing him play. It's a phenomenon. The admiration for Roberto Clemente keeps growing and growing every year.
And according to Clemente Jr., his father is also remembered for his unwavering pride in his Puerto Rican heritage. On October 17, 1971, he was interviewed after being named World Series MVP. And when he spoke, Clemente became the first athlete to speak in Spanish on national television in the United States.
It's a huge story that of a kid from Carolina, Puerto Rico, that actually was able to win an MVP in the World Series when the world was watching. And the first thing he said, before I say anything in English, I would like to say something to my mother and father in Puerto Rico.
And before I say anything in English, I would like to say something for my mother and father in Spanish. En el día más grande de mi vida, para los nenes, la bendición mía y que mis padres me echen mi bendición en Puerto Rico.
On the greatest day of my life, I give my blessing to my children and ask that my parents give me their blessing in Puerto Rico.
He spoke in Spanish, and that galvanized the whole Spanish community.
And as Clemente Jr. got older and learned more about his father's legacy, he also built his own relationship with Monty Irvin.
And I'm sharing this story with Monty as I met him in 1973. And, later years, we became very close because I would see him at the Hall of Fame and sit down and listen to his stories. But being connected to Monty for those many years was very special.
Roberto Clemente and Monty Irvin aren't the only baseball pair to have a connection even in death. Remember Pedrín Zorrilla, the manager of the Santurce Cangrejeros? The one Josh Gibson wrote to shortly before his death in 1947? Nearly 30 years later, Zorrilla helped to locate Josh Gibson's unmarked grave. Zorrilla helped raise the funds for the proper headstone for the man who once called him his brother. Here's Bob Kendrick.
They were brothers. They were brothers who were bonded by baseball. It's such an important part of the story that we relate here as we look at the totality of the Negro Leagues. Like many of us, I enjoyed watching the World Baseball Classic. And I penned an op-ed piece making the case that it was the Negro Leagues that paved the way for the WBC, because they took their brand of baseball all over the globe. And virtually every one of those teams that played in the WBC at some point was touched by the Negro Leagues. But that connection with those Spanish-speaking countries was so symbiotic. It was a meaningful, deep-rooted relationship.
Cuba, Venezuela, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Panama, and Puerto Rico. All places where the Negro Leaguers came to play. All represented in the World Baseball Classic. And speaking of the World Baseball Classic, we're in San Juan, March 7th, 2026, days before the Houston game. Estadio Irán Bithorn, a Caribbean jewel of a baseball stadium, where I would go to games back in the 1970s and 80s. Puerto Rico versus Panama. I was there, and guess what? Fans were still talking about Clemente. Even the name of the archipelago's baseball organization is called the Roberto Clemente Professional Baseball League. Here's Dean Huertas. He's New Yorican with a massive social media following. Dean loves the Puerto Rican baseball team so much that he's done ambassador work for them. He also bleached his hair and beard to match the rest of the team, whose players have bleached their hair since 2017 and are colloquially known as Team Rubio.
Roberto Clemente. I feel like he would have changed a lot of things in terms of baseball, but also in terms of what Puerto Rico would look like today. I feel like he was a great example of what potential sovereignty looked like. Go to any country in Latin America, they recognize him as more than just a baseball player. They recognize him as a man for the people first. And if he were alive, I just felt like there's a stretch, but I feel like if he were alive, Puerto Rico would have had a better understanding of what sovereignty is.
With the score tied at 3, the game headed for extras. When Puerto Rican shortstop Darryl Ignaiz blasted a 10th inning walk-off home run, the crowd went wild. They broke out into Preciosa, a patriotic song that's become an unofficial anthem for the archipelago. And it does feel like Puerto Rico is as sovereign as any nation. The pride was loud. All the fans were immersed. It's hard to imagine a time when the sport wasn't so beloved here. I don't know what Puerto Rico would be like if Clemente were still alive today, or whether, as Huerta said, Clemente would make sure Puerto Ricans have a better understanding of what sovereignty is. But I do know this. That feeling of sovereignty, that freedom, was something experienced by the Negro Leaguers who came to play in the colony of Puerto Rico. So for promoting baseball throughout the archipelago, inspiring stars like Roberto Clemente, Puerto Rico can thank the Negro Leagues. And for offering a place of equality and acceptance like they've never seen before, the Negro Leagues can thank Puerto Rico. And we can all thank baseball for that. Next on American Colony, Iris Chacon, the legendary Puerto Rican vedette, a performer whose body was desired by both the archipelago and the United States.
I just remember she had a big old butt all the time. She used to shake it and shake it. I was like, I can do that.
American Colony is a series from the Latino newsletter and Shake It Easy Media. This episode was produced by Alana Schreiber and edited by Nuria Net. Translation help from Illan Ireland. For archival recordings, special thanks to the Lewis B. Nunn Center for Oral History at the University of Kentucky Libraries. You can also listen to this episode in Spanish on our feed under the title Más Libres que Nunca. American Colony is an original concept by me, Julio Ricardo Varela. Nuria Net is our senior editor, and Joaquín Cotler is our senior producer. Our hosts are Nuria Net and me. Carlos Berrios Polanco is our producer. Susan Ramirez de Arellano is our consulting producer. Cristina Hernandez is our managing editor. Amalia Nunez Pires is our video producer. Social media videos are by Anthony Modesto Milian and Aliana M. Vigil. Ricky Rodriguez is our illustrator, and Alan Emil is our composer. Additional music courtesy of Soundstripe. Joaquín Cotler, Nuria Net, and I are our executive producers. Support for this program comes from the Mellon Foundation, the nation's largest supporter of the arts and humanities. More at mellon.org. American Colony was also made possible by individual donations. To support the nonprofit work of the Latino newsletter, click on the Donate tab at thelatinonewsletter.org to give.